Aloha. Welcome to American Issues Take One. I'm Tim Apicella, your host. Today's title is Trump's Arrest, Arraignment, and Charges. For those who are Americans and have been watching the last couple of days unfold, probably represents a sad day for everyone as far as the President of the United States has actually been charged and arrested and released. For those who are Trump followers, this is an outrage. For those who are not Trump followers, this is justice that has finally shown up at his front door. And to talk about these issues and what took place this week, to my guests. With me today, we have our special esteemed guest, Chuck Crumpton, and our ThinkTech Hawaii contributor and frequent guest, Cynthia Sinclair. Good morning, everyone.
Morning.
Good morning.
I'll start with you, Chuck. What does the arrest of Donald Trump and the arraignment of Donald Trump represent to you as an American, as a voter?
Oh, so many things. I mean, one, just the visual image of a relatively young Black Manhattan district attorney having the courage to bring this, despite all of the things that he knows will come down on him, his family, his friends, everybody he's connected with. And to take on the Trump equivalent of the Johnny Cochran team on this case. I mean, that's some courage and some character. Hey, you got to give the guy credit. One for Alvin Bragg.
It's a milestone for sure. Cynthia, same question for you. What did the arrest and arraignment of Donald Trump, either the visuals or leading up to this point, what does it all represent to you?
Well, I have a problem with the way the media is eating this stuff up and giving him millions of dollars worth of free advertising. And it means to me we're going in the right direction. It's a really important statement that nobody is above the law. And, you know, his big cry at his speech after the fact when he got down to Mar-a-Lago again was that if they'll come after me, they'll come after you. And I didn't hear one single news pundit, and I went through a lot of different channels watching it last night. Not even one of them said, that's right. You know, break the law and they'll come after you too, is right. They will come after you if you break the law, just like he did. No one is above the law. And I heard it a few times, no one is above the law, but I didn't hear them directly address that because not just him, but every Republican. I keep hearing, well, not every Republican. I am over-exaggerating on that one. The Republicans that I heard come out in defense of him last night and yesterday, the day before, that's what they said. The same thing. If they'll go after him, if they'll go after a former president, then they'll come after you too. And I didn't hear any of them say, you're right, they will break the law, they'll come after you. And so I'd like to have seen that.
Yeah.
more.
You know, I'd like to just kind of tag on to your concept there and what the GOP is saying. And, you know, one thing that I kept hearing over and over again is, why are they waiting 6 years to do this? Why now? Why 6 years later? And it struck me kind of funny because, you know, for 4 years, no one was allowed to touch Donald Trump because he was in office. And the DOJ memo said, thou shalt not touch a sitting president for any criminal charges of any type, any sort. So there's 4 years off the top right there. And then January 6th created its own delay. Am I missing something on that, Cynthia?
No, it's even a legal precedent that if there's some reason why you can't have access to that defendant, then you don't have the same levels of being too long and too far away from the incident. So it kind of gives this buffer in between, whether it be maybe they were in a coma or they were president or whatever the reason is. There's a sort of a pause on the statute of limitations when they don't have access to the person.
Okay, good. Thank you. Chuck, we talked this before the show came on, is that for 1.5, 2 weeks, we've been hearing pundits opine about the fact that, this is going to be a silly indictment from District Attorney Bragg. It's going to be nothing but a bunch of misdemeanors. Well, we found out on yesterday, that they weren't misdemeanors. In fact, they were leading to felony charges of falsification of documents that pertain to New York State. Any surprises there for you? And what do we say about people who prejudge that which was not known?
Well, first of all, there's a wonderful irony here because the 34 felony indictments and the ground for them make it absolutely clear that these payoffs were an attempt to hide evidence as part of a conspiracy to commit election fraud. Now, charging Trump with 34 felony counts of essentially engaging in acts to further a conspiracy of election fraud is wonderfully ironic in the context of the GOP and Trump positions. Mm-hmm. You got to give.
But there was no conspiracy charge. There was no conspiracy charge per se levied against Trump here. Was that a surprise?
No, but there is, because the predicate of these being felony charges is that they were conducted as part of a conspiracy to commit another crime, which was election fraud. Mm-hmm. We all know that. Alvin Bragg has said that. Certain commentators have said that. We get it.
Could we see another round from Bragg of I don't know what you call it, another special indictment that pertains to what you just said and or tax evasion issues against the state of New York?
Well, the tax evasion, it probably isn't going to be his. Somebody else has that. I think maybe Letitia James and whoever have that one. But he doesn't need to. All he needs to have is the connection to that. He doesn't need to prove the election fraud. He just needs to show that these acts create a reasonable inference beyond a reasonable doubt of furthering that election fraud. Mm-hmm. There's a brilliance to this particular set of indictments.
And which is what?
How do you get rid of them? I hear Todd Blanche, the new lawyer that Trump's just added to his team, who had to bail out of the Cadwalader firm to do it, which tells you something. That could be a whole show by itself. Why did Todd Blanche have to leave his longtime big law Cadwalader firm, one of the big name firms in the country, to take on this defense? What's the conflict that forced him to do that?
Right.
That would be an interesting show by itself. Get Portnoy and Avi Soifer and have at it.
Let it fly. Years ago, we had Senator John Edwards, who was charged with falsification of documents. I'm not sure he was charged with campaign fraud or not. But all charges did not stick. And it seemed to be his main defense was, I didn't falsify the documents to hide things from my campaign or my candidacy as president of the United States. I did it so my wife wouldn't find out. It seems to me that that could have been a viable. It could have been a viable defense for Donald Trump as well. But he clearly stated, and I think it's even recorded by tape, that we'll just delay the payments until after the election, and then it won't matter what Stormy Daniels says. And that certainly was true in the case of the doorman who, had a story to sell to the Inquirer and the Playboy playmate, Karen McDougal. who I think also sooner or later was dismissed payments because it didn't matter what she had to say. He'd already been elected. Your thoughts about any comparisons to John Edwards and his line of defense versus what Trump's defense team may come up with?
Well, a couple of things. One, if there's one thing that Trump does not do, it is hide anything from his wife. He actually flaunts it, whether it's about grabbing parts of women's anatomy or anything else. I mean, he's right out there up front. I do this, I get away with it, live with it. Also, we got to remember how Ivanka got to her position anyway. She's going to use it. She's going to squeeze all the juice she can out of that. Good for her. But the other thing is he's got three of the highest paid, highest profile lawyers in America trying to come up with ideas for defenses for him in this. And so far, the best they've got is, well, he said something about delay the payment until after the election so nobody will care what she thinks. Good luck with that.
Yeah. All right.
If your best lie comes up after your credibility is gone, how much good is it going to do you? Talk about closing the barn door.
Closing the barn door. That could have been used before he met Stormy Daniels. Okay, so Cynthia, what's your take on what's been laid out as far as the indictments? It's kind of not crystal clear, and I read the transcript of the court hearing, and that was very informative. But there was also something called the Statement of Facts, which was more or less a roadmap of where District Attorney Bragg may go with this case. Your thoughts about what is clear and what is not clear, and your thoughts about what Donald Trump's team may try to pull a rabbit out of their hat on or not. They seem pretty cocksure that they're not worried about these charges, and it's a slam dunk that Donald Trump will get off. Not to blame an attorney for that bravado, because that's what they're paid to do. But your thoughts?
I don't find the lawyer Takapina to be any way genuine or believable. He almost looks like he's on drugs because his eyes are all over the place and he's always talking so fast. And I think, dude.
That's just a New Yorker, I don't know what to tell you about that.
The other lawyer is a New Yorker. I understand the whole New Yorker thing too. And so maybe that's all it is. And I'm not accusing him of anything. I'm just saying that's how he comes across to me.
Okay.
And so that I find really unsettling and very unbelievable. He doesn't seem genuine at all. So that's why I think, because of the feedback from Takapina being out there on all the talk shows, talking to everybody, they suddenly have two new lawyers in place to present the case in court, which I thought was interesting. And I don't know if it's because maybe Takapina's license is only in New York, but that's where they were, is New York. So it's like, wait a minute. It didn't make sense to me that they would bring on these other two lawyers all of a sudden.
Well, one's a white criminal attorney, I believe.
Yeah, Tom Blanche.
Right. Yes, a white collar crime. Yes, and that makes sense. But why at the last minute is what it doesn't make sense. So I went over the Statement of Facts, like you were saying, which is very different from the indictment, because the indictment doesn't go into any of the details, right? So they're all the details that we are kind of out there that everybody knows about. One thing that I found interesting that was missing in the Statement of Facts is the fact that he was intimidating Cohen all throughout all of it. As Cohen was trying to come forward with the truth and speak his mind and tell his story, they've been trying to intimidate him from the beginning. So maybe they didn't say it yet because the indictment hadn't happened. He hadn't been arrested yet. So he isn't exactly intimidation of a witness because he's not a witness yet, I guess. I'm not really sure. I don't understand why that isn't in there, because he was even put back in prison to try to shut him up. even.
Right.
So, I mean, it's really extreme intimidation. So I was surprised that wasn't on there. Maybe it's something they plan to bring up in court. I'm not sure. This is something that really struck me. And it's every show, every channel. They bring on these legal experts that give their opinion and say, well, he might be able to do this and it's possible for that. And I think, why is everybody giving him a bunch of free legal advice? Because that's kind of what it is. And
I thought the same thing.
no, it's not. But by the same token, and this is, we can look back during both of the impeachments. There's all these lawyers coming on, saying their opinions, talking about what they might be able to do, what they can't do, what is and what isn't possible. Well, if it was me, this is what I'd say for him. And we saw him take those little tidbits from the news and apply them immediately in his defense. And I thought, wow. So I kind of always thought, why are we giving him ideas? If his lawyer doesn't have those ideas,
it's the
why
age of
would we want to
YouTube.
tell him, right? It's all part of the I'm mad at the media for making this a circus and giving him exactly what he wants. You know?
I guess I'd say that, I've never fixed a Maytag dryer before, but I just go on YouTube and I figured out how to do it. So why not legal advice? So,
they might very well go on YouTube and do that. I don't think
you never
so.
know.
But we do know that he watches all of the news programs. He likes to keep his finger on the pulse of who's saying what about what, which means he's hearing it. And maybe his lawyers aren't quite as smart as some of the ones that we get on MSN or CNN. So all I know is I thought it was just ridiculous to be 24/7 Trump again. Isn't that playing right into his hand?
Yeah.
And how do we stop that? And I mean, I know here we are today talking about it, but that's because it just happened yesterday.
Well, Cynthia, good point. There's a difference between, covering Donald Trump just before he enters in the courthouse and when he leaves the courthouse versus the 35 minutes of him getting in his vehicle at, Trump Tower and going through traffic onto the freeways, off the freeway exits. And, there's a difference of media coverage between the two I've just described. And when are we going to get away from the sensational coverage of Donald Trump getting in a vehicle and almost like it's the O.J. Simpson media deal,
Right. Exactly. 6 hours.
And so did we learn anything from 2016? I guess not.
I would say no. Or
2015.
Even 2020 or January 6th. And at least with January 6th, there was a lot of different things to cover, right? There was a lot of different angles. It wasn't all Trump. It boiled down to this is on his plate, but there was so much else to talk about. The Capitol Police, the rioters, the other Republicans, all that stuff, right?
Yeah.
And so it's different when it was then. And I think now, though, once they say he's been arrested, this is the indictment, moving on.
Moving on, right. All right, Cynthia, I'm going to ask you both to opine on the following here. Chuck, I'm going to read a quote here directly from the transcripts that the instructions the judge gave both to the people and to the defense attorneys and to their clients. He said the following. So although I'm not going to issue a gag order and something close to a gag order, I would encourage counsel on both sides, the people, to please speak to your witnesses. Defense counsel, speak to your client and anybody else you need to, and remind them, please refrain from making statements that are likely to incite violence or civil unrest. Please refrain from making comments or engaging in conduct that has the potential to incite violence, create civil unrest, or jeopardize the safety or well-being of any individual. Now, Chuck, Donald Trump waited no more than 4 hours to break those instructions at Mar-a-Lago. He took issue directly with District Attorney Bragg, the judge himself, the wife of the judge, the daughter of the judge. And does that create any legal hazard for Donald Trump and his defense team?
Well, it's a great question, Tim. And I think it relates to Cynthia's point that if the media is stupid enough to give Trump back control of the narrative, if they haven't learned in the last 7 years what happens when they do that, they'll never learn. On the other hand, remember who the media is. Rupert Murdoch and the boys, you know, the Fox guys who just got hit with an order out of the Delaware judge in the Dominion case, an 81-page order that, while it's going to trial on the issues of malice and damages, a lot of the other stuff is already decided in Dominion's favor. It is defamation per se and a bunch of other stuff in there. So the judge set a very clear line in the sand standard, a last resort standard. Do not make statements that are inclined to incite violence or civil unrest. Another one that he referred to later is don't make it impossible for the court to be able to conduct these proceedings in an orderly and judicious manner. That's a more discretionary standard, but he's basically warned both parties, stay away from that. If you get anywhere near there, there are going to be sanctions and there are going to be orders. So Trump is now daring him to say, okay, I can impugn the character and the integrity of Alvin Bragg and his wife and his daughter and anybody else I want to, and get away with that with impunity. I'm a presidential candidate. I have my free speech rights, but those are not necessarily on their face intended to incite violence or civil unrest. So I'm on the safe side of your standard.
You know, tomorrow I have Jeff Portnoy on, and I guess the question I would ask him, and I'll ask you, is there a fine line here between Donald Trump's, especially if he's a candidate for president, a fine line between his First Amendment right versus instructions specifically addressed to Donald Trump about limiting his free speech?
That's a great question because it distinguishes between the perspective and responsibility of the judge, which is to enforce that line in the sand, and anything that gets anywhere close to it or goes in that direction. And Trump's feeling that, hey, as long as I don't blatantly cross that line and ask people to engage in violence and civil unrest, I'm okay. I can attack anyone I want, any way I want, as personally or as untruthfully and as viciously as I want.
Let me run this past you before I go to Cynthia. And that is, you know, I was pleasantly surprised that there was not civil unrest. There was protest, maybe 100 pro-Trump and 50 non-pro-Trump. But I was happy that there wasn't violence outside the courthouse. The question is, do you think the conviction of almost 1,000 people at January 6th had any influence on who showed up and to what level or degree they protested? Chuck.
Yeah, well, first of all, Trump's team, which is smarter than him, fortunately for him, I'm sure has done everything in their power to make sure that anything in any groups that they influence and Trump influences hold off on violence and civil unrest, at least for the time being. The judge has flagged, this is my trigger point. If you get anywhere near there, if you go in that direction, there will be consequences. They got that, okay? The thing that Trump's doing by doing this is he's undercutting his counsel's ability to have any credibility with the court if they believe they have any valid defenses to these indictments. They've claimed that they do. Let's see it. If they think the Edwards case is their defense, keep thinking.
Yeah. Okay. Hey, Cynthia, just on Chuck's point, Donald Trump cited the judge's wife, the judge's daughter, cited that she worked for Kamala Harris, and just by implication, he was trying to say that's a bad thing, and that's part of the whole cabal to get Donald Trump. Do we necessarily have to wait for someone to take violence against the judge's family before the judge maybe potentially sanctions Donald Trump and his team? Look at Pelosi's husband. Didn't take much of a dog whistle for someone to, show up at the front door of the Pelosi residence and incite violence. And to Pelosi's husband's demise, he was in the hospital for quite a while, and he may never be the same. I mean, he had a TBI. Do you think the judge would be well in order to take the words that were spoken at Mar-a-Lago yesterday and say, maybe a bridge too far? Your thoughts?
I didn't like the fact that he said, please. I don't think it should have been a request. I think it should have been an order straight. And he didn't come across as an order. And maybe it was, and maybe I just didn't catch that part, but it didn't strike me as an order. And there was no specifically laid out consequences, or where the line is. It was so murky what he said. Okay, so there's no problem until somebody gets hurt. Why wait till somebody gets hurt? Why not draw that line in the sand beforehand?
Was this an attempt on Trump to have the judge recuse himself for any reason?
I don't see why there would be any reason for him to recuse himself. I know he was.
Well, if he's going to rule out of emotions that he's been threatened or his family's been threatened, Chuck, to you on that point.
I think this judge is smarter than Trump. I think he's already laid out step one of his strategy. This is a step discipline thing, like in employment, right? It wasn't an order, it was a warning. Okay. He's got 3 of the highest paid, highest profile lawyers in the country to control their client. The judge made it crystal clear. His instruction was to counsel. Talk to your client, talk to your witnesses, get them under control, restrain them from engaging in conduct that gets anywhere near this kind of risk. Hey, he's going to come back to counsel for that. If you can't control your client, I will.
Okay. We're out of time, but I just want to run one last thing here, and that is an immediate poll was taken by CNN, and basically they said 60% of those polled approve of the indictment, thought it was well warranted, and 40% disapprove. Interesting, a number was that another question was 37% think that Trump did something illegal. 33% think that he did something unethical, but not illegal. And 10% think he did nothing wrong. And 20% just don't know. Chuck, what do those numbers speak to you? I mean, it's not a 70-30, but it's 60-40 is not bad. What do you think?
Yeah, I got to be honest. I don't place very much stock in polls. They didn't tell us much in 2016, 2020, or 2022. So I just don't. If they tell us anything, they suggest that recognizing the percentage out there that are diehard Republicans, you say it, we'll say it, people, that if you've got 60% backing this conviction, if you've got 70% saying either illegal or unethical conduct was committed, you got a lot of independents in there, and you probably got a lot of relatively young people in there. Well, when it comes to 2024, every one of those people gets a one-person, one-vote count.
Good point. Especially when you mentioned the independents, I forgot to mention this. 94% of Democrats approved of the indictment. 62% independents approve of it. And believe it or not, 21% of the GOP approve of it. So 20% plus 62%. Not bad. Not bad. Okay, Cynthia, your thoughts on these polls and what's America thinking before we sign off on this show today?
Well, I'm with Chuck. I don't put a lot of stock in polls, and I think that they're very misleading, and I think they're kind of a menace because they change the way people think, they change the way people act, and they're acting on something because they're so dependent on who they ask, when they ask, and how they ask. So it's like, they're so, I don't know, it all depends on that stuff. So I don't think it's really a good idea to put that much stock. But I must say, it did make me happy to hear that 21% of the Republicans, that's a larger number than I expected, are okay with this indictment. So I thought that was pretty good. I like that.
Well,
if we're at last thoughts, what I have, which is kind of right along all of these lines. So if it's all right, I'm going to
go ahead.
A quote from Mary Trump. And I think it's really important stuff. So she says about him and the media, she's speaking about the media. It is not required that the attention be on his terms. One of the most crucial skills we have to learn going forward is figuring out how to thread the needle between accuracy and accurately explaining the real threat Donald poses to American democracy and knowing when to withdraw our attention from him entirely, which is what should have happened after his mendacious post about his imminent arrest. Perhaps, which I agree with her. We talked 24/7 about a lie that he put out on his Truth Social. It was ridiculous. Which is what should have happened, Steve. Perhaps most importantly of all, we need to be clear that the reason Donald poses such an existential threat is because of the lengths both he and the entirety of the Republican Party will go to protect him.
Mary Trump. Good for her.
Mary Trump.
Hey, Chuck, your last thoughts or insights to our topic today?
I would just underline exactly what Cynthia just said. There is no low beneath which they will not go.
And when you say how low can you go, we can't answer that.
Not yet.
Hopefully, every media CEO gets a copy of Mary Trump's quotation. Be nice. All right. With that, we've run out of time. I'd like to thank our special esteemed guest, Chuck Crumpton, and our ThinkTech Hawaii contributor and frequent, often guest, Cynthia Lee Sinclair. Thank you very much for both of you for attending the show and providing your insights. An important topic. So until next week, won't you join us for American Issues Take One? I'm Tim Apicella, your host, and we hope to see you then. Aloha.
Thank you so much for watching ThinkTech Hawaii. If you like what we do, please like us and click the subscribe button on YouTube and the follow button on Vimeo. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn, and donate to us at thinktechhawaii.com. Mahalo.